The book is called Mobile Urbanity. It is edited by two scholars, Neil Carrier and Tabia Sharer. Neil Carrier is in fact an expert on Eastleigh. He is the author of Little Mogadishu, which was published 2 or 3 years ago. The first book ever to be written about Eastleigh, about its history, and how it became a global Somali hub over the years. At that time, he was teaching at the University of Oxford, but he's now at the University of Bristol. And the second editor of this book is Tabia Sharer, who is from Germany, from the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And the book contains, in total, several chapters. Chapter 1, which is an introduction written by the two. Chapter 2, which is a section that I had authored about my own experience as a Somali growing up in Kenya, and in particular in Eastleigh. The main chapter is the Somali factor in urban Kenya, a history, which is written by another prominent academic, Hannah Whitaker, who has written a book about the conflict in northern Kenya in the NFD from 1963 to the 1960s, late 60s, who writes about the origins, the first origins of the Somali community here in Kenya. Chapter 2 is about women Somalis in Nairobi and Johannesburg, in Eastleigh and Mayfair in Johannesburg. Chapter 3 is written by, again, Neil Carrier and a young upcoming Oromo scholar called, not an Oromo scholar, but a Rendile scholar from Marsabit called Hassan Kachore. It is about the Oromo community. Hidden among the Somali community in Eastleigh is a very large Oromo community who have been attracted to Eastleigh because of their religious, ethnic, and cultural affinity with the Somali community. And then part 3 of this book talks about the economic power, the growing economic power of the Somali community, with a section on Eastleigh, the commodity stories, how the Somali community started trading, linking Nairobi with Guangzhou in China, with Dubai, linking with Istanbul, with Brazil, creating this global network of trading that is now centered here in Eastleigh. And then chapter 5 is capital mobilization among the Somali refugee business community in Eastleigh. A lot of people, a lot of Kenyans usually ask, how come these Somalis we see here walking almost barefooted can raise the capital to do the businesses they're doing? And you know, those people who are anti-Somalis or may not like Somalis would say it's piracy money, it's contraband. But here, John Mwangi Gidigero, who is a young Kenyan academic, and Kenneth Omenje document how refugees raise their capital legally and contribute to our economic growth. And then chapter 6 looks at the bottom-up process, how women enterprises have become a major player in the business of Eastleigh and many of these Somali communities. You would find a lot of the businesses, like this plaza here, Noor Plaza, was built and is owned by a woman. And a lot of that is not known outside. A lot of people only see the male Somali out there. So Holly Ritchie talks about how women raise that money. And then finally in chapter 7, there is a chapter called Reinventing Retail, Somali Shopping Centers in Kenya. And Tabia Sharer, who is a co-author of this book, writes about the new emerging Somali businesses in Nakuru. Did you know that Nakuru and then Mombasa and places like that, Kisenye in Kampala, these are new centers of economic growth, which is predominantly Somali. In my particular case, I was moved very much by the title of the book. You know, before the book was written, we participated in a conference that was held in Nairobi about mobile urbanity. And in my narrative, I explained that I myself have lived that experience. You know, I grew up in different parts of Kenya. Here in Eastleigh, we went to Western Kenya. From Western Kenya, we went to Northern Tanzania. From Northern Tanzania back to Western Kenya. Somehow my parents have always lived in border towns. They used to live in a town called Nyamtiro in South Nyanza, Kuria. And our house was on the border. The farm behind our house was where the beacon, the border, if you stretched your hand in the garden, you would touch Tanzania. And then we moved to Busia. We were in Busia again straddling across borders. And then finally my parents moved to Namanga, where Mzee Haji Yassin is also. Again, exactly on the border. Their house is exactly on the border. You can throw an item from one side of the border to the other. So we are border people in terms of movement, and I explained that history. Eventually I was saved from that mobility because I was sent to a boarding school. I ended up in a boarding school and therefore had a bit of stability. And I explained how my brother, my elder brother Abdul Qadir, beat his parents in this exercise of urban mobility. His son Abdullahi is a young lawyer. He's here. He not only left Kenya, he went to Uganda. He had a business in Tororo with his uncles and cousins. And then he went to Kampala. And when he raised enough funds, he went to the Uganda-Congo border. And eventually we visited him on the Congolese side of the border in a town called Bunia. He had a shop in Bunia in Congo. So this mobility is reflected in my own internal family of mobility, pastoral mobility that is now translated into city life. And even when I became an adult and I went to work for the BBC, I continued my mobility. I worked in London, I lived in South Africa, I lived in Uganda, I lived in many parts, and eventually I became truly mobile by working for the UN Refugee Agency, and I ended up working in 24 countries, in Asia, in Latin America, Europe, parts of Africa, in the Middle East, and eventually ended up in New York, working in the Secretary General's office, Kofi Annan's office for several years, before I returned back to Nairobi. So my own life is a true reflection of that urban mobility, mobile urbanity. We are living mobile phones. We transcend borders, and so this book is about that. And they are using the Somali example as a study, as an example of mobility, immigration. And you know, all over the world, immigration is what has made the world. There are countries that are entirely made by immigrants. The United States is an example. The former president of the United States' father was born here in Kenya. He was first generation American, and he became the president of the United States. Even the current president of the United States, who is very anti-immigrant,